So thank you, everyone. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on risk management resolutions for 2023 and how to best keep them. And now just a quick introduction of your presenter. My name is Ava Lucevero. I am a business analyst manager here for Wolf & Company, specifically for the WolfPAC Solutions group. And I've been in this role for about 8 years. And just some quick housekeeping items before we get started. This session is expected to be around 30 minutes long or so. We are going to record the session and post the recording to our YouTube page. And we're going to send out the slides out to all of our attendees as well after the webinar has finished. So you'll receive an email from us with both the recording and the webinar slides at the conclusion of today's session. And finally, if you do have any questions at all that you would like to see answered during the session or during the end of the session, I did set some time apart at the end to answer any questions, and you should see in your webinar panel a Q&A box. I believe there is a chat box as well, but if you do have any questions specifically, please feel free to send those in via the chat box, and we'll do our best to get those answered for you at the end of the session. Or if I see it midway through, I'll do my best to answer it as I see it come in as well. So do please feel free to make use of that Q&A box if any questions come up during the session today. All right, and with that, I'm going to dive into our objectives today. So here's kind of what we're hoping to achieve from today's webinar session, which is really just focused around highlighting today's most trending kind of topics or headaches, pain points when it comes to risk management. What are kind of the biggest challenges that we're facing when it comes to risk management? What kind of pain points are those challenges bringing on? And obviously, we want to eventually then present solutions to hopefully, improve those pain points or at least kind of resolve those issues and really kind of enable you to have the most strengthened risk management program that you can. And so what we'll do is not only talk about kind of trending risks and pain points, but we'll also talk about solutions and best practices for how to address some of those to really have, like I said, just a really robust risk management solution and have a really proactive approach to risk reduction and risk mitigation, which is, of course, really important when it comes to our businesses, keeping our businesses safe, keeping our customers safe. We want to make sure that we're kind of starting off this new year off right, keeping the business and the customers safe. And kind of just positioning yourself for success, position yourself for an easier exam or an easier board meeting that you might have coming up, just kind of getting a better grasp on your risk management program and ultimately be able to position yourself for stability and growth going forward in 2023. So those are the main objectives today, talking about the risk management universe and what's going on there. So what risks are we seeing trending today? So one of the biggest risks or trends that we are seeing is, you've probably heard the phrase, the great resignation, the big quit, that's been kind of floating around in the past couple months, the past year or so. And there's been a lot of surveys, a lot of research into this. It turns out that up to 40% of employees are thinking about leaving their job in the next 3 to 6 months. There's a lot of desire to, get out, try something new. And that can obviously lead to a lot of challenges and risks in the workplace when you have a lot of high turnover. There's obviously challenges in not only, enticing staff to stay, but if they do leave, actually being able to replace and train their replacement is also can be a challenge, especially when it's very specialized experience or very focused on one particular niche. It's hard and challenging to find that type of specialized experience. So when you have staff leave, you have challenges with training and bringing on new staff as well. Other threats that we're seeing are really just what we call insider threats. These are really kind of just any threat that kind of originates from within the organization. And that can be intentionally or unintentionally. So you can have, things like ransomware attacks, phishing attacks, where, there's some social media engineering happening where people are trying, sending phishing emails to your staff and they inadvertently or inadvertently, give out information that they shouldn't have. So that's another big threat and a big risk that we're still seeing on the rise today. Human error is often one of the biggest threats or sources of risk that we see. So being able to stay on top of that, have staff trained and aware of those type of scams and phishing emails, attacks that could come in, that can lead to a lot of exposure. And that is another big area where we're seeing risks trend as well. Other trending risks that we're seeing are really just increasingly complex cyber threats. The risk is kind of always evolving. There's always new tools being put out in this out in the open. There's tools and software systems that are commonly used by hundreds, thousands, millions of customers often. And those are often going to be easy targets for bad actors. If you have, a ton of people using one core banking system, then that's probably going to be a likely target for a bad actor if they know they can kind of maybe hack into a system and get a large amount of data and breach that data all at once. So it kind of, you have certain systems that are becoming not easy targets, but they're being targeted just because of the fact that they're so commonplace and kind of used by so many different organizations. So you do have to kind of be aware of those bigger systems, but also even just smaller new products and services. There's kind of a tool for everything these days, lots of productivity tools out there. So it can be tempting to, onboard and adopt all these new tools, these products and services, but that can also expose your organization to risk as well. So you kind of want to, balance, the new tools that you're bringing in, like I said, because that can bring in new risks to your organization, depending on what type of tool that is. Other risks that we do see trending right now are, of course, kind of geopolitical risks that are arising from conflicts that are happening all over the world. One example I put there is the Russia and Ukraine conflict. But that's something you don't always think about necessarily impacting your day-to-day job, but sometimes it can. Sometimes you can have supply chain issues arise, or just even just disruptions if there's, conflict happening in a certain part of the world where maybe your vendor that you use is outsourced and has some part of their business based in, Russia, Ukraine, some other conflicted area. So that can lead to issues down the line that kind of do ultimately reach your business. Like I said, supply chain issues is a big one. Inflation, we're kind of all feeling the impact of inflation these days. So there's these risks that kind of don't necessarily seem like they would apply to you day to day, but sometimes they do kind of trickle down and impact you or your business down the line. And really, at the end of the day, the another big risk is just kind of the failure of monitoring these third party relationships that you have, checking, where are they based? Are they based in somewhere that does have conflicts going on right now? You want to just make sure that you're monitoring those relationships on a kind of standard ongoing basis, so that you're kind of staying on top of what's going on with these different vendors or third parties that I have a relationship with. So you're kind of equipped with that knowledge and prepared for any disruptions, any threats that those vendors are facing. Those might extend to you as well. So that's one of the other biggest risks that we see, is kind of just not monitoring these things. It really should be top of mind. It doesn't have to be an everyday thing, but on a pretty frequent basis, kind of just on monitoring your relationships that you have with different software, different tools, different vendors, and so on. So those are some of the trending risks that we are kind of seeing in the industry today. And some of those risks are leading to just really just pain points that are kind of impacting us in everyday life. Like I said, just trying to do your job. It could become difficult if you don't have risk management kind of under control, right? So you really want to stop relying on a manual or kind of disconnected risk management practice. I know a lot of organizations will often have, just a lot of different spreadsheets, or different groups are kind of monitoring different pieces of information. And those, that information is living in different places. So there's a lot of data in different places. It's being managed by different people, and it's oftentimes in conflict with each other. One person updates their spreadsheet, but that update didn't make its way to, the 10 other spreadsheets that someone else is maintaining. So that can be really hard when you kind of have things spread out all over the place and you don't have centralized risk management data. And that really having access to not only accurate but complete data is really critical to make these types of important risk management decisions that you should be thinking about day to day. So you really want to make sure you're centralizing your risk management program. We also see a lot of times that it feels like it can kind of be an easy solution to just pay someone to take over, right? To just bring in a consultant and have them deal with your risk management process. Maybe you feel like you don't have enough resources, but this can also lead to pain points as well. Just it can be expensive, it can be costly. Oftentimes they really won't know kind of all the ins and outs of your business, so they're not going to kind of really understand your kind of risk management universe fully. So that can kind of expose yourself to risks in different ways. It's not always kind of the easy way out is to just pay someone to deal with it. It often will benefit you more in the long run to kind of have a solution that you kind of own when it comes to risk management, so you kind of know where you're at, and you kind of can understand, looking at the next bullet point there, you can kind of understand the complexities and implications of risk management yourself rather than having somebody else kind of come in and do that for you. It's really important that you're kind of addressing risk, kind of before it's too late, before you have, an exam finding or something goes wrong, you have some sort of business disruption. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. You'd rather, it's much better for everyone to kind of get ahead of risks before they even arise, kind of get controls implemented to prevent risks before they even happen. And before things like compliance or legal issues creep in. We know that those can be costly. And that can take a lot of time to resolve. So really that's what we're trying to avoid by kind of staying on top of your risk management program. You can kind of start to avoid a lot of these pain points that we find so common in everyday life, everyday jobs that we do, right? So what can you do? So we kind of talked about different risks that are trending, different pain points that we're all facing, I'm sure, in one way or another. So what can you do? So the best thing that I can offer you is to think about future proofing your risk management program. Don't use 10 different spreadsheets to maintain this data. The best and safest solution for you is to leverage some type of software or tool. WolfPAC Essentials is one of them that can really help you simplify risk management. Like I said, just centralize it, standardize it, kind of have standardized risk assessment and a standardized process and methodology that you can follow to identify threats that you have and make sure that you're prepared to mitigate those threats with controls in place, and ultimately just be able to forecast issues, hopefully before they happen, to avoid disruptions, to avoid, like I said, legal issues or regulatory issues. You kind of want to be able to get ahead of those before they happen. And a centralized risk management tool will be able to help you do that. Like I said, just by kind of being proactive and being able to assess the different risks that you're facing and get ahead of those, address them up front, identify control gaps, and be able to stay on top of those, like I said, before they happen. That's going to be really, really key to getting a risk management program off the ground and having it actually kind of be a more sophisticated risk management program that is less disjointed than maybe what you have in place today. So now I want to talk about what are some best practices. So what can you be doing? What can you be changing day to day as far as risk management? And I'm kind of focusing in on a couple different topics. So the first one I started off with is third-party relationship management. So the very first step to this is, of course, just going to be, maintain a single centralized list of all of your third-party or vendor relationships. That's not always an easy ask. Like I said, sometimes this information is just kind of spread out in a bunch of different departments or with a bunch of different people. But what you do want to have is one singular list of all the vendors that you work with. And that should be not only technology vendors, all the vendors that are providing software solutions to you, but also non-technology vendors, things like your paper supplier, your cleaners, lawyers, all types of vendors that you might have a relationship with, but aren't necessarily providing you with a software or a tangible piece of tangible service. even those what feels like might be a low risk vendor, like I said, like a paper company or a cleaner, there are risks that can be uncovered there. You know, a cleaner is still coming into your office every evening and has access to whatever is sitting out in your office. So there's risks that can arise in relationships that kind of seem harmless at the surface. And so that's where it starts, is really just compiling a list of all the vendors that you're working with, even if it feels like it's a moderate or low risk relationship to you. Just get it in the list, just get it inventory. That's kind of step one, to really just starting to identify your most critical relationships that you have. And that can kind of start to drive other risk management activities, like monitoring those relationships, or kind of knowing which vendors require kind of a deep dive risk assessment or not. And something like a risk assessment is going to help you identify some of this information. You know, what's high risk, what's low risk, what vendors are storing or transmitting sensitive data, or NPPI, that non-public personal information. That's a question you'll probably get a lot from an auditor or an examiner. You know, show me a list of all of your vendors that you know, have cloud data or that have sensitive data being stored somewhere. Um, so that starting off with an inventory that just has all of your vendors, that's going to be your critical first step to starting to identify some of this other information that's going to be important to the risk management process. Other best practices, I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but just simply monitoring your vendors on an ongoing basis. You really want to kind of stay on top of that relationship. You don't want to kind of just sign a contract and forget about it for the next couple years. It's really important that you are monitoring your vendors, especially your most high risk or critical vendors. You know, asking them for a SOC report, checking in on their financial status, you know, checking, have they been in the news recently for any reason? Have they had a data breach? Have they had any legal issues? Anything to that effect. You kind of want to be checking in on your vendors, and making sure that they're kind of in good standing. It kind of just helps establish credibility for that vendor and kind of trustworthiness of that vendor that you have a relationship with. You know, you're probably paying them good money to have this relationship, so you want to kind of make sure that they're kind of in good standing and they're credible to you as a vendor. And so I did put up in the top right here, this doesn't have to be an everyday thing. This can be a process that spans, you know, every 2 or 3 years, that, you know, you want to be monitoring these vendors on at least some type of regular basis. And I put a sample, you know, kind of schedule here where you can kind of break things up by risk and just take all of your high risk vendors, make sure you're monitoring those annually. And then as you start to get into your moderate or lower risk vendors, you can monitor those, you know, a little bit further out, every 2 years, every 3 years. And that's up to you, you know, depending on your organization, how frequently you want to be monitoring these vendors. But you do want to set up some type of ongoing schedule, to make sure that you're kind of reminded to do these activities, check in on the status of the contract, check in on their SOC report. And again, just kind of making sure they're still in good standing. So that when it actually does come time to, you know, look at your contract and review your contract with them, you're kind of equipped with some knowledge around how they're doing and whether you would want to proceed with that relationship or not. Okay, now continuing with best practices for third parties, like I said, I kind of just touched upon contracts. You want to also make sure that you are reviewing your contract on an annual basis at least. You know, just keeping track of key dates, and a tool like WolfPAC Essentials can help you do this as well. Kind of just centralize all of your contracts, get all the dates in one place so you know what's coming up to expire soon, or what might automatically renew soon that I might not have even known about. That's another kind of unintentional cost that can kind of creep up, is those unintentional contract renewals that you didn't even know it was just going to auto renew, in the first of the year. And now here you are stuck in another year or 3 years of a contract that maybe you don't necessarily need. So that's another thing that a tool like WolfPAC Essentials can help you with, is keeping track of all of these different contracts, all of these different dates, and actually be able to kind of flag and alert you when things are coming up due, or when they might automatically renew, so you can kind of get ahead of those things. And then the other bullet that I kind of skipped over here at the top is just performing due diligence on new vendors. Before you sign a contract, before you start a relationship with a new vendor, do a little mini risk assessment on that. Check on Again, their trustworthiness, their credibility as a vendor. Do you feel comfortable working with them? And that's something that you can do with a risk management tool and a centralized risk assessment tool, especially, is kind of perform that risk assessment, perform that due diligence. So you kind of have a sense of the risk of working with a new vendor before you even onboard them. Okay, switching gears to now talk about best practices when it comes to IT or information technology risk management. I said this for third parties. The number one tip here is, again, to create a centralized inventory of, instead of vendors this time, it's technologies and hardware. So any software that you use, any hardware that you use, and you don't need exact count. You don't need to know that there's 170 laptops. You can just put laptops once and risk assess the laptop once, and that kind of covers your risk assessment for laptops. So you don't need to be repeating the same risk assessments over and over, but at the very least, build out an inventory of all the different tools that you work with. And again, all the different hardware that you use, servers, printers, ATMs, because there's inherent risk in all of those things. If you have a printer that's connected to the internet, that can even be a risk in itself if somebody can, hack into your printer and do something with that. So there's all these kind of little places that you might not think about having risks that do oftentimes have these inherent risks. So that's why I always recommend, as a starting point, is to just, build out that inventory of everything that you use. Start performing risk assessments on those to really start to identify what are those kind of hidden threats that you might uncover if you do use any of those technologies or hardware tools. And really the goal here is just making sure that you have strong controls implemented to prevent any of these threats from occurring. You want to make sure that I have some sample threats listed here, but you want to make sure that you have controls in place if there's a denial of service attack against one of your vendors, or maybe you on your end have misconfigured some of the security settings. Maybe the vendor has misconfigured some of the security settings and they're not patched, they're not up to date against the most recent vulnerabilities. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of hidden places where threats can arise. And simply just kind of inventorying out these different items and starting to perform a risk assessment on them will really help you take that step forward in having a much more sophisticated risk management program that can really kind of tell you where your threats are lying. Other best practices when it comes to IT is kind of a straightforward one, but just making sure that all the systems that you have are secure. So if it's a system that is storing sensitive data, either internal data, customer data, you want to make sure that that has strong security controls in place. So that, of course, starts off with something like a password. What's the minimum password length that the system asks for? Does it require, special characters and numbers and capital letters and lowercase letters? How complex is the password that's required? Or, does it require multi-factor authentication? That's another really key control that you want to have in place for the vast majority of your systems and technologies, if you can, if that's offered. To just kind of add that second layer of security so that if somebody is trying to get access to a system that they shouldn't have, that two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication should be kind of that barrier or that control that would prevent somebody from getting into a system that they shouldn't. So you do want to be checking that, all of your most critical systems do have that option to turn off or to turn on multi-factor authentication rather, and does have pretty complex password requirements. So you can kind of feel that the data that's living in that system is safe and secure. Okay, and then the last topic I want to cover some best practices on is going to be business continuity. So that's kind of focusing on more environmental or geographic risks. If you have a bunch of different locations, you want to be thinking about how are those different locations going to be impacted just based on, where they are physically in the world. Are they in an area that's more prone to flooding or to hurricanes? So there's all these threats that aren't necessarily IT or cyber related threats that you also want to be considering when it comes to risk management, and especially when it comes to business continuity best practices. You want to be kind of thinking about physically and geographically where things are located. And, what's the impact to you? You want to kind of be making sure that you're performing a business impact analysis on your most critical areas, departments. If a technology or a department were to suddenly become unavailable or gets disrupted for whatever reason, do you have a plan in place to recover that department or that technology? Who do you contact? How are you going to respond? How are you going to recover? These are all very important components of building what is ultimately your business continuity plan. That's kind of your key document that's going to kind of be your guiding force through any type of unexpected disruption. The pandemic was a really good example of a disruption that we weren't all necessarily prepared for. But some organizations had a really robust business continuity plan, and they kind of knew, okay, we can, set people up to work from home. And there's kind of alternatives you can take, but you do need to plan ahead for those things. And that's where a good business continuity plan can come into play and kind of help you be able to respond to some of those types of interruptions or disruptions, and really prepare you to respond in a way that kind of minimize disruptions to your business at the end of the day. And a business continuity plan is something that does come with WolfPAC Essentials. We'll give you a full template, kind of like you're seeing in the screenshot here, of all the different sections that we kind of recommend that you should have in a business continuity plan. So again, a risk management tool like Essentials or something similar can really be helpful in getting your risk management program off the ground and kind of having at least a template to work with, so you're not kind of just starting fully from scratch. Okay, and then continuing with the topic of business continuity, the last thing I'll say is just you also want to designate a crisis response team. So any type of business continuity response or recovery teams, you basically just want to make sure you have points of contact in place. If there is a sudden outage or incident, disruption, you want to kind of be prepared with, a contact list of who needs to be contacted. What are the steps we need to take to fix this disruption? Are there any legal implications? Are there any, IT ramifications of this? So you do want to also make sure that you're documenting these kind of recovery teams and kind of these point personnel who would kind of be responsible for responding and recovering an incident or a disruption to your business. Okay, so that was some best practices. And like I said, a couple of different areas. We talked about IT best practices, third-party best practices, and then finally business continuity best practices. So those three areas are going to be really, really important in kind of organizing your risk management efforts, especially for the new year. If you want to kind of start the year out on a good foot, it would be really beneficial to kind of take some of these steps to avoid some of those pain points that we talked about. We don't want to be dependent on a single team member or even, 10 different team members who are kind of juggling information in different places. We want to kind of organize and centralize everything, continue to monitor those risks and relationships on an ongoing basis. Like I said, it's not just kind of a one and done thing when it comes to risk management. It kind of takes an ongoing effort to kind of maintain that you're safe and you're protected for you and your customers. Other things you can do is just making sure that you're kind of addressing control gaps or weaknesses as you find them. And again, that's something that a risk assessment like WolfPAC Essentials will really help you identify as those types of gaps or weaknesses that you might have in your really risk management program today. And so with a tool like Essentials, you can really ultimately just prepare better and more thoroughly for exams, or even just for, like I said, a board report, or just kind of any instance where you need to kind of have proof that you kind of have your risk management program under control. A tool like WolfPAC Essentials will really help you do that and kind of give you a leg up in that regard. And it really will give you that backup plan, so you have something in place if you do face a disruption of any type. You'll at least have everything kind of in one place and one single tool that'll make it a lot easier at the end of the day to ultimately kind of position yourself for growth in the new year in 2023. So I've said it a couple of times today, what can you do today as kind of a first step in the right direction to get your risk management program off the ground? We do offer this tool, WolfPAC Essentials. a lot of the things, a lot of the best practices that I talked about today, you'll find those features and offerings in our Wolfpack Essentials tool. This is a free tool that you can try for free, or you can get a demo for free. It's all on our website. I put a link here. And like I said, you'll get the slides after this, so you'll have this URL as well. But this is a really, really great tool that's going to help solve a lot of those pain points that we just talked about. Because a lot of these things can be done in a tool like Wolfpack Essentials, and it can be done automatically for you with little to no effort to kind of get that up and running. Now, if you want more, now if you're kind of thinking, oh, well, there's more I want to do, there's other risks I kind of want to explore, we do offer many other solutions here at Wolfpack. I've listed out a whole bunch of them in these kind of blue bricks that you're seeing here, and all of these are available a la carte. So if you're interested in any of these risk management solutions beyond just, kind of IT, third party, business continuity risk that we talked about today, we do have a number of other offerings as well from Wolfpack on our website, wolfpacksolutions.com, and you can kind of browse those as well. Like I said, they're all a la carte, so you can kind of pick and choose what you might need from a risk management perspective. All right, so that is going to conclude my slides for the day. And I'm just going to switch gears and check if there has been any questions that have come in, which it looks like we do have a couple that have come in. So the first one is just asking, how often should we be doing risk assessments? Yeah, so this is a good question. It really will vary kind of depending on, resources at your organization and kind of when you have time to do things. But a good rule of thumb that we often recommend is at least annually, especially for your highest risk or most critical vendors, technologies, hardware, et cetera. We often recommend that your highest risk, you want to update and refresh every single year on an annual basis. Make sure that those are kind of the most recent, the most up to date. When it comes to lower risk vendors, kind of more off the shelf solutions, things like an Adobe PDF reader, things that are more widely used, that are just a little bit lower risk to you, those can kind of spread to 2 or 3 years. So like I said, I kind of said this a couple times, but risk management doesn't have to be kind of an everyday, you're down in the weeds type of thing. This is something that you can kind of spread out across the year, or even over a couple of years, and kind of just chip away at it over time. So it doesn't have to feel like such an overwhelming lift to get a risk management program off the ground. You really can start small. And like I said, just kind of start off with your most high risk vendors and go from there. And you can kind of work your way down the list to your lower risk vendors and technologies with a little bit less urgency there. All right, and then one other question I do see that came in is just, what are common blind spots that you see in risk management that aren't often considered? Yeah, so this is a really good question as well, because I talked today a lot about risks that are specific to technologies, to vendors, to hardware. And what is often missed or overlooked are kind of those higher level or more organizational threats. So threats to the organization as a whole, rather than the threat of using a specific vendor as your core banking provider. So these can just be things like our staff trained, kind of just more high level threats. Our staff trained and equipped to prepare against phishing attacks? Is management trained in what makes a good risk management program? That's always one of the biggest vulnerabilities. It's often people, like I said, whether it's intentional or unintentional, are where we see the biggest risks or the biggest data breaches happening. So you want to perform what we like to call an entity level risk assessment to really kind of hone in on some of those more specific threats that kind of, like I said, you don't think about. They often get overlooked because they're more of a threat to the organization as a whole, rather than the threat of, like I said, using a specific technology or hardware. So having a pretty strong entity level risk assessment that looks at risks to your organization as a whole is very important in conjunction to looking at those risks of specific technologies and vendors and so on. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in. If you do have any, please feel free to reach out. I think I have a slide here, yep, that has my contact info. If you do want to reach out after the fact with any questions, or like I said, if you have any interest in Wolfpack Essentials, or if you wanted a tour or a demo or a free trial of the products to kind of see how this could benefit you and benefit your risk management program, please feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to put you in touch with someone who can kind of help you explore Wolfpack Essentials or kind of the best solution for you when it comes to risk management. All right, looks like we have no other questions coming in, so I will wrap it up there. I do want to say thank you so much to our attendees for joining. And like I said, we will be sending out the recording and the slides after this to you. So don't worry if you missed anything, we'll send out the recap to you. And like I said, please feel free to reach out again with any other thoughts, questions, concerns that might pop up after we conclude the webinar today. So again, thank you so much to all of our attendees, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join today.